Hello guys, welcome back. So I have the original scene that I've made here, and with the cables I also added these simple geometry that I took a circle, extruded, and added some bevels to it, and then I deleted everything except the start point and the end points. So both of them are there, and then I simply copied this geometry over all these guys. Now we have these cool cables. Okay. And I also, this is the original one, I deleted all the points at the bottom. Cool. So, and I also have the points with a sphere copied onto them. And that's what we're going to use to emit light from. So let's add some material to this first. So I'm going to go to the matte context. I'm going to create a principled shader. And I need one for the ground. And I'm going to increase its color to 0.5, 0.5. I'm going to turn off the reflectivity. I don't want it to be reflective. I'm going to copy this, call this statue. And let's drag this on the statue. Set this to 0.8 for all of them. And I want it to have reflectivity, so I'm going to increase the reflectivity to 1. And then for the cables, I'm going to copy the statue, all these cables, and we'll leave the same color as well. So let's drag this and have some reflectivity on them. Let's create a camera. Frame this. And I'm going to use area lights with physically based rendering, or PBR in Mantra. So first thing, I want to create an area light at the top, lighting everything basically in the scene. So let's create a light. I'm gonna change it to a grid, and let's move it up. And let's increase the intensity. That should give us a good indication for what area is going to hit. And I'm going to increase its size by changing the area size. Let's rotate it like that. Cool. I'm gonna give it a blue tint, and I think that's pretty much it. Now, the main control for the area lights, call this top area light. The main controls are the intensity, exposure, sampling quality. You can choose to render the actual geometry if you want to get the white plane or something like that. And then we have the active radius to decide how much it affects. By default, I'm going to leave it on to with no limits, and let the render handle that. We can also choose to let it only emit along one direction, which is the Z orientation. Otherwise, it's going to emit in both directions, which is fine in this case. We can also turn the spotlight feature on, and this will make it into a area light, but with a cone feature, and we don't want that at the moment. So let's create a couple more. I'm going to create the second one, and want some fill light, so I'm going to put this behind the statue. And let's increase the scale. I'm going to give it a violet color, something like that. And let's add, this part is something that I wanted to have this to be the center or the focus point, but the scene is not complete, so it's not working pretty well. But we can add a spotlight in there, for example. I'm actually going to create let's create a light again, and let's change this to a sphere. And with this sphere we can get a proper spotlight with soft shadows. So let's turn these two off from the viewport and focus on this one. Spotlight. And I don't want the light to be super bright, because I want to be able to get some cool illumination from the moving spheres or the mesh light that we're going to create. So that's important. Okay, cool. And let's change this to orange. Something like that. Okay. And let's turn these two back on. And let's have another light from this side casting from this side casting shadows and specular. I want to catch some highlights here. So I'm going to copy the area light top and move it. And this is going to be a slow render, unfortunately, with all these area lights. So we'll have to lower the resolution and quality to get some interactivity. Okay, now what I'd like to do, I want to be able to tweak this real time as well while checking the render. So I'm going to tear off a copy of this. That will give me a floating viewport. I'm going to move it to the side for now, and then we can switch to the render view and set up our mantra node. Let's go to the out context, create a mantra node, and let's explicitly add the nodes that we're interested in. We want the statue, we want the cables, we want the ground. These are the main things. And then for the lights, I'm going to explicitly include the guys I want as well. Actually, a star will do for now. So let's change this to physically based rendering, and set this to 4:4. I'm going to limit the reflection to 2:2. And I'm going to change the resolution to 960 by 540. And let's hit render. And I'm also going to, the LUT is loaded, but I'm going to make sure that I'm reading it. And I want to use the slog LUT to improve the colors of the overall scene. Cool. So I don't like the back here with this purple tone. So I'm going to try and change it to an orange tone. Too saturated. Yeah, something like that. And I think the spotlight is not working. I mean, we have to have something here, and so for now I'm gonna disable this light. And then the side light, which should be this, let's change its color so we know which one we're using. Yeah, it's the side light. I'm gonna change this to orange as well. And this is, I wanted to get some highlights basically. I'm gonna lower this a bit, maybe 600, and I want to add, saturate the top light. I want to get a lot more blue tone in the overall scene. Something like that. So that when we have a distinctive color emitting light, we can easily pick that up and make it easier for the eyes to see. Okay, I think this is pretty much it for our simple lighting. Let's see what it takes to get a clean render out of this. Now let me move this ground. It looks like it's, the statue is floating a bit. I think it's floating a bit, I'm not so sure. I don't want to change it because that will intersect with the wires. And I'm going to change, I'm going to delete this. This is the back light. I'm going to saturate this a bit more. Top is cool, and this is the fill light or side light. Okay, let's go to the out context, copy this. I'm going to set this to 1280 to 720. And let's set this to 6 and 6, and let's lower this to 0.005 and leave everything else as the default. Let's hit render, and see the quality. It takes time for the APR to sample and finish rendering. It takes much longer for it to clean up compared to an actual render, so I always like to do that, the test render, to fully see the quality of the image. So we have our wires. Again, I didn't do any special shading on them, just the default shader, same for the statue and everything. Cool. So I think the settings are quite good. We're getting a pretty clean result. No noticeable noise at all, which is very, very cool. The statue is reflective, which is very cool as well. We're getting some highlights here. Maybe you can lower the roughness of the specular to pick up more highlights on these wires. Okay. And we can always increase the brightness to see how it would look like with the image exposed. And I think it looks pretty good. Maybe this very saturated color at the moment. But yeah, pretty happy with the result. Let's take a look at adding those emissive objects. So I'm gonna go back to the sub level, and what we need to do is we need to create a geometry light. So I'm gonna create a light. I'm gonna change it to geometry, and I'm going to select the geometry that we need to use with this, and we can specify that under the area light options. I'm gonna drag these points. We have to have, it's much better to have an actual geometry, and in this case I have spheres that are bigger than the curves, because if we make them smaller than the curves, we wouldn't have anything around the cables emitting light. So we needed a geometry that is visible. So I made the spheres a little bit bigger, so we have an actual geometry to emit from, and let's call this geometry light. I'm going to increase the intensity to something really high. I'm going to give it a different color. And let's go to the render, mantra 1. I want to include only this light. So first light, geometry light. And let's go to the render view and hit render, see what we get. Very cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the emission. I increased the number so we make sure that we get a result. And the sampling the geometry light and something complex like this requires a lot of samples. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it in 2 passes. One pass that has the area light, the geometry light. You can see we're getting shadows and everything. And then a second pass where we only have everything else in the scene. Okay, so we'll do that later. And I want to add one more thing. I want to add an environment light. Environment light. I'm gonna give it a different color, something like that. I'm gonna have it low, and I will. I want to have this in case I decided to do something. In case I decided to relight the scene, and I will explain this once we start doing some compositing. Now let's go back to the mantra node. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to call this geometry light, and let's increase this to 0.05, and let's do a render and see how it looks, how those settings will fare with the geometry light. And in the meantime, I'm also going to change the sampling quality for this light. I'm going to set it to 2. because I know it's going to be really hard to solve the noise. We're not going to be gaining it too much, so it'll probably be like this, but it's still important to use very high quality sampling to get the proper illumination from this complex source. You can see there's a lot of noise here. Okay, so let's do this. One thing I'd like to do with this geometry light, or with any light, is to turn on the active radius, and this also works with geometry or anything. So I'm gonna set it to, let's say, yeah, it's using 0, 0 as its origin, so maybe 20. And I'm also going to use the attenuation, so I'm going to copy this, paste relative reference, and it can decide how these lights decays. And I want them to be super bright in the beginning at the source and then dies off quickly. Okay, so let's leave that. I'm going to lower this to maybe 4000. Let's go back. Let's increase the settings, which is pretty high for a PBR. I'm going to set this to 2:10, and let's hit render. And see how this looks. I think it's too low. Probably the radius is removing everything. Sorry, it's not too low. The display was too low. Okay, looks like the sampling is now much better, and we see the points here. Cool, definitely a lot cleaner. And with the active radius, it basically Mantra doesn't have to decide anything beyond that range, so it's much easier for it to make a judgment and prune out the light itself. So this is still pretty bright. I just want the points to have a nice emission around them. So this is definitely a lot of illumination, but I think we can make good use of it in comp and tweak it, rebalance everything as needed, and maybe even have the lights and everything else gets turned off when this light is traveling through, or maybe have another mask that controls the light intensity based on this. So where this is on, everything else is dimmed, and then when this is off, everything else is a little bit brighter. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the quality of this pass. I'll probably increase this to 12:12 and the minimum to 3 here, because I want to do some high-res stills, and actually one high-res still. And I'm going to go closer to the geometry, something like this, and let's pick this frame. Okay, and I want to render, so this is the geometry light, set it to 1280 with 720, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and set a different pass for all the other lights. I'm going to set this to 6:6, and for the other lights I'm going to include everything, including the environment light. Okay, and under the extra image planes, I want to export all the AUVs, or the per light AUV. I want to get a beauty pass for each light, so we can do some relighting in COPS. And let's call this beauty pass. Let me set the output for both of them. It's going to be hip. So this is going to return the hip file name and dot the $OS, which is the node name. I don't want the hip file, I don't want the frame, just these two, and that will do it. And make sure this is a cam2. I'm going to hit render to disk, and we'll continue in the next video. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in a bit.